We are live. Hi, guys. How are you doing? It's nice to greet you finally on my own channel again after a short break. You all know that I've been co hosting the Archie Luxury Show, the live stream, on a daily basis for a little bit now. And this will continue until Wednesday. And it's been a great pleasure so far. I'm having the time of my life, but here I'm finally doing a live stream, which I promised to my friend Archive of Swords, who is in the chat already and who has been very patiently waiting. So thank you so much. I have a bunch of different programs coming up in next few. Thank you so much. In the next few days and weeks. I want to give you a quick snapshot of what those are. I am going to be talking about the Royal Oaks, Audemars Piguet Royal Oaks 50th anniversary on April 15. Before that, next weekend, next Saturday, I'm gonna have both a short video about what's next for Omega, and talk a little bit about vintage and neo-vintage Submariners, particularly the models 5513 and 14060. And finally, we are coming back with this video where we talk about what to look for in a Rolex GMT-Master II when you are looking for an example in the secondary market. Now, I should try to be very clear about what I'm trying to do. I am pretty much trying to lead my friend to get a reference of GMT-Master II before 2007. The obvious choice would be to say, go into the secondary market, work with a gray market dealer that you can trust, and try to get the most recent model at the best deal possible, and with all the collaterals, right? With the boxes, papers, and everything else that comes with a new Rolex watch. And that has become a reflex because of the particular scarcity of the current lineup. You can hardly acquire them as your first purchases from authorized dealers. Stranger things have happened, of course. Some people still are able to, by some alignment of the stars, by some measure of a cosmic event, they can still get as their very first luxury watch a Rolex sports watch. I do believe them. Things happen, but we have to be realistic. So if you want to go with a more recent model, you have to find a trusted gray market dealer. And these models have been trending up and up, which means that you will be paying a premium because you want to get a desirable model without having to get into a waiting list and having to wait for years and years, potentially. And you're also, in a way, buying the seller, in which case there's, of course, a premium associated with that, right? Sometimes some of the people in the community make fun of one of Archie's sponsors, David SW, because he charges a large premium on the purchases. Well, he does that because he has established a certain measure of trust over the years, which he hasn't failed, and he treats his customers in the right way. I have never heard of anyone who has had a bad experience with him. So ultimately, when you go into those situations, it is a seller's market right now. You'll have to pay quite a bit, and it may well be more than what you would like to put into a single watch, more than what you would like to put into your first luxury watch. Patricia Teague, good afternoon to you as well. It's very nice to see you. Now, of course, the other thing that I want to talk about was the issue of fake watches. I'm going to post in the description a very helpful comparison video that Oshin has posted. I think it's been a few months already, where he compares a recent Rolex Submariner with what we call a super fake, right? One of these more recently produced fake watches that are not homage watches, that are not merely copies, but that try to seriously pose themselves, present themselves as the real thing, right? As the genuine article, as a Rolex watch. And that video is at once very informative and very depressing, because when you, again, are just confined to visuals that greet you from a computer screen, it is very hard to tell the difference between the genuine article and a super fake. And that will be my first advice, right? Watch these sorts of videos. You can read up on any sort of material that you can find online. I can tell you 10, 12, 20 different points that will theoretically help you distinguish a fake from an authentic Rolex. Ultimately, none of this will really help you purchase a watch. Nothing would replace the kind of knowledge you build by actually handling these watches, right? Now that we are emerging from the lockdown, and since you are living in a large metropolitan area, you owe it to yourself, right? As a first-time buyer in this particular segment of the luxury market, you owe it to yourself to go out there, go to the authorized dealers first, right? Get a feel of the contemporary lineup. Try to see if that is what you actually want, right? Perhaps that's the case, right? You want the modern build. You like the functionality of a travel time watch. And the GMT Master obviously is the granddaddy of all. You like that heritage. You like the story that connects it to the 1950s and Pan Am, which was the first airline to do these transatlantic flights without layovers. And this is exactly why that function was designed, right? So they could keep the time at the place of their takeoff and the place of their landing. So they could tell the time in two different time zones with the help of that fourth hand that was called the Greenwich Mean Time hand. Now we'll go back to some of the functions and how the GMT-Master II distinguishes itself from the previous GMT-Master model. But what I'm trying to say is you might just want to do that, right? Even though I'm trying to direct you to the pre-2007 models that still have the aluminum bezel, right? That don't have the ceramic bezel. That may or may not even have a functional lume on the dial, right? Anytime before 2000s, it will be tritium. And since we are well into the half-life of that material, its luminosity would have expired. So you want a very functional watch. You want something that is absolutely modern. You want something heftier, more substantial, um, something sturdier. You will have to go with the most recent model. But the only way you can know that, the only way you can, first of all, get familiar with the kind of watch, recognize what is an authentic watch, and figure out whether this is actually what you want, is to be exposed to those watches, is uh, only by handling those watches in person. Of course, again, being in a metropolitan area, you also have a great variety of jewelers, of watchmanders, uh, and other kinds of secondary market dealers um, that will have a wide selection. So in many cases now, again, since the conditions have become a little more um, relaxed, you can just drop by and ask to see the particular models they have. Of course, a lot of them have websites, social media accounts, so you can do your research previously, uh, in advance, I should say, and then drop by or call them and set an appointment and go and see particular kinds of watches. And you should never feel like you have to go in when you make a purchase, right? They owe it to you, um, you being a well-informed customer rather than a mere consumer. They owe it to you to present their articles to you in the best way possible, to let you get informed and to let you have a hands-on experience before you feel sure that this is exactly what you want and this is the seller that you want to deal with. So any dealer who doesn't make it easy for you to see their stock, who doesn't allow you to actually go through their watches, try them on, check their functions. Is the bezel still rotating? Is the movement in good condition? And can they guarantee it? What, for 1 year, for 2 years? Not even. Is if there are papers, if there are any documents that come with the watch, are they filled out? Do they match the serial number that's on the case? Can I see the serial number on the case? Can you pop out the bracelet so I can take a look at the serial number? um, can I see that bracelet? Can I see the bracelet code and see if it matches with the head? Does it belong to that particular period, that particular year? All these details that I would be happy to walk you through at a later time, and perhaps not necessarily on a live stream, you should be able to ask. You should be able to investigate. And if the seller isn't allowing you to spend time with the watch in that way, of course, under their supervision, and figure out if that is exactly what you want, you don't deal with that person, right? It's as easy as that. Trust me. As difficult as the market has become, as expensive as these watches have become, and perhaps because of that, um, and as their current model seems to be at least loosely based on scarcity marketing, you have the right as a customer to make an informed choice. And if they don't let you discover these things for your own sake, they don't deserve to sell you the watch. After all, you're buying these with your hard-earned money, um, and they're not really bestowing a privilege upon you. You have you're well within your rights there. So that will help you. We have talked about the ADs. Now we're talking about all sorts of secondary dealers like jewelers, um, and other sorts of watch sellers that you would find in a highly populated metropolitan area. And that will help you to discover basically how a Rolex watch from early 2000s feels, how a Rolex watch from 1990s feel, how a Rolex watch from 1980s feel, how a Rolex watch from 1970s, late 60s feel, right? Unless you know these things, you might well think, having only handled contemporary watches, wow, these watches are so light. They're not hefty enough. They're not substantial enough. There must be something wrong with them, right? They can't be Rolex watches. I have had many friends like this. They're no longer my friends. But joking aside, you have to know what a watch from a certain period feels like, how it feels like when you handle them, how it feels like on your wrist, how it feels when it's on a bracelet, when it's on its proper bracelet. You have to consider all these details. And I can tell you any number of things about how they should feel. None of that will substitute for you trying these out in person and figuring it out. So you need trusted secondary dealers, not any random dodgy dealer or jeweler. But again, you're living in a metropolitan area. We can figure this out very easily. I'm sure you have an equivalent of a Better Business Bureau and all sorts of reviews on all these people. Read up on them and learn which ones can be trusted, and then go in person and examine their stock. Now, of course, as a general rule, as a general rule of thumb, and this is not so hard and fast, of course, since the current hype is all about the contemporary models, since the desirability of the current lineup has gone through the roof, most fakes are produced and focused on particularly those models. So you basically are able to cull the herd a little bit more if you are focusing on a certain period. If you are looking for Rolex watches of a particular vintage. Of course, there's a whole set of other problems when you start moving back in time. And if you're looking for a particularly desirable or an exotic model, and there are kind of fakes and Franken watches produced to replicate certain elements, certain unique elements of that model, that's another discussion again. I'm going to direct you to what I consider to be the ultimate compromise and the ultimate sweet spot in terms of a trade-off between vintage and contemporary when it comes to Rolex. And that's the late 90s and early 2000s. Now, why am I saying this? When it comes to the GMT Master, we have already said a few things about their origins in the 50s, which was a four-digit model, 6542, I want to say, off the top of my mind. Right, 6542. I want to bring that up as we are talking through this point. Right, you see already this is a very helpful visual. It doesn't teach you everything. It doesn't, again, it's not going to replicate your experience of having these watches side by side in front of you. But this is the original GMT Master from mid-50s on a riveted oyster bracelet with a bakelite bezel, with a more slender GMT hand you see here. Things have aged out quite evenly on that radial dial, I guess you can call it. And here you have the most recent version that is once again called Pepsi because it replicates that same color scheme. But this time you have a ceramic bezel, you have the modern Jubilee bracelet, which perhaps brings out the dressier side of the watch. And you have, of course, chromalite luminous material, which gives it a more modern type of shine when you are in the dark. These models were replaced by another four-digit reference, 1675, which was in production from 59 to 1980. Again, these are very desirable in their own right. I would not recommend something like this as your first Rolex purchase unless, again, you're ready to look for the right one and invest a little bit more. They're an acquired taste, right? Once again, when you move back in time, you have watches that have a very different build and very different feel. They wear so differently than a contemporary sports watch that you might not be into it, right? You know, it's much easier to move back in time slowly and see how your tastes evolve. So when the GMT-Master II was introduced, it was kind of a gradual transition. And that began with what we call the Fat Lady. That's 16760. Right here. It was the first GMT-Master II. It was only produced in the 80s, 82 to 88. This could be one model you could be interested in. I don't necessarily know if you are. Justin, thanks for stopping by. Thank you. Danny, again, thank you for stopping by. Gaza Edge, thank you so much for stopping by. I do also have a preference for the Oyster bracelets. Maybe that's one thing that strays me away from the very, very current line where the stainless steel sports watches are matched with Jubilee bracelets, but that's another discussion altogether. I'm not that radically against them. Coming back to the reference number 16760, this was the model that for the first time introduced a sapphire crystal to a GMT-Master. That was the first time, again, the so-called Coke bezel insert was introduced, which has a black and red bicolor combination. Although, you know, this could have you fooled in the way it has aged, where you have almost the look of navy blue or a very dark, deep blue, midnight blue, you might say, whichever, and a kind of like Moroccan red or something. And that's one of the beautiful things about GMT Masters with the bicolor two-tone bezel inserts, right? The aluminum ones, unlike the earlier backlight ones, and very much unlike the current ceramic ones, age in these peculiar ways, and they each have their own unique look. So that can be something that you can obsess over and look for in the secondary market. I wouldn't advise it, but when you find the right watch, you know, with the right contours, with nice full lugs that are not polished down to a toothpick, when everything is right, you have the appropriate matching bracelet, you have an original dial, original hands, you go for that first, right? When you're buying a vintage watch, you go for condition above all. Everything else comes later. One perception that people have is that the aging and the patina on the dial should match with the aging and patina of the hands. That can be a good sign, right, when they match roughly, but I wouldn't obsess too much about that, because Rolex now claims to be completely vertically integrated and build everything in-house. They're right for the most part. There are some exceptions, but in earlier times, right, certainly decades ago, they would have the dial produced elsewhere and by a number of different manufacturers, and the hands produced elsewhere and by, again, a couple of different manufacturers. So you can't really expect them to age uniformly each and every time. What you should look for, and that's why you should equip yourself with a UV light and a loupe. What you should look for is, if it's tritium, as it is in this case, when you put that UV light on it, they might still glow for a few seconds, and they should go out right around the same time, right? Because even if the aging and the patina on it is different, if the material is the same and the material is tritium, they should not glow in the dark at this point, right? And Rolex used tritium all the way into year 2000 when they changed into Luminova, right? Which should still glow because that's the kind of material it is. But if you have these that have a beautiful cream, sometimes eggshell kind of patina against the black dial, I love the way they look. They won't have that functionality of glowing in the dark, so you might be disappointed with that. But it really depends, right? What are you looking for? Are you looking for these sorts of aesthetics that you can observe in the daylight? Or are you looking for the functionality that gives you the glow in the dark? If you're looking for that, you have to choose one that goes from 2000 to 2007, and the reference number you would be looking for would be 16710. Low-key collector, thank you for passing by. Guys, if you're so far enjoying the content or learning from it, please feel free to give a thumbs up, upvote, and tell other people. I really, really appreciate your presence and your support. Rick Foss, right? Why didn't I save for a Rolex in the 1980s? I was merely a teenager. I wasn't even a teenager in the 80s, although I have aged terribly and look like I should be. All right, so this was the 16760, which introduced a lot of new things to this line, and the most important one I saved to the last. It introduced finally an independently moving hour hand, right? And I will try to show that here, and I will start first with my GMT Master that I kept by my side. It's not set to the right time, but when you basically pull out the crown and you are arranging the time, you see there's no way to actually decouple our hand and the GMT hand that is quickly emerging now from under the Cyclops, right? They move in unison, they're married to each other, and when the bezel is set right at the 12 o'clock with the triangle showing 12 o'clock, you have basically a military time there, and you use the bezel insert to make that GMT hand match with the time zone that you are showing. When it comes to GMT Master II, and that's why the very first model that was a GMT Master II in 16760, and that had a newer movement. You had finally an hour hand. One second. You had finally an hour hand that you could move independently, right? Which does what? You have, you can keep that bezel at 12 o'clock. You can have them move in unison and show you the 24-hour time. You can make sure that even here with the bezel insert, again, you can show the second time, but the way you can separate them out, you can also count the hour markers as with 2-hour increments and calculate yet a third time zone. So you have an extra functionality, more or less, when it comes to GMT-Master II, where you can tell time instantly in 3 time zones by looking at your watch. It might not be for most people as handy as checking it out on their iPhone, but I think it's one of the coolest functions, one of the coolest complications, as we say in the horological world, that was invented. And I think it's very handy, it's very simple, and it's very useful. So who can hate that? I'm not easily impressed by complications on watches, but when you have something functional, something useful, something you can actually learn and benefit from in your everyday life, I can't say no to that. And I'm so happy to have acquired this watch. And I kind of kick myself in a way for not having gotten one earlier, and not only for financial reasons, right? The way I'm enjoying this is just out of all proportion in terms of what I was expecting. So the reason I'm going to try to move a little faster at this point, and I always welcome any of the comments. 16760. It's only produced from 1982 to 1988, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So it will that might eliminate it for some of you, and for you, archive, since it will have the tritium loom, so it won't be functional in terms of giving you that glow when it's dark. And it has one more distinctive aspect to it, which may or may not make it preferable for you. When they first introduced that functionality that I was showing, that allowed the hour hand to move freely from the GMT hand, that decoupled the hour hand from the GMT hand, from the fourth hand, the new movement they came up with made for a thicker case, right? So compared to other GMT Masters until year 2007, so compared to other pre-ceramic GMT Master IIs, this is a thicker watch. Try it on for size, as they say, and see if that is what you're looking for. Maybe you want to get a little more of that heftier feel. Another aspect of that heftier feel, and another reason I tried to direct you to late 90s and early 2000s. And the main reason, really, the primary reason that makes some of the Rolex watches from early 2000s so attractive to many is because right around the year 2000, you have this beautiful compromise, and I'm going to show you another watch, now from my collection, which is my Polar Explorer 2, exactly from year 2000, that has a similar GMT function, right? Except it has a bezel that doesn't move, right? Yet an hour hand that is decoupled from the GMT hand. It still has this holes case, right, that you can associate with vintage Rolex sports watch, even though it's hard to call, you would be hard pressed to call something like this vintage. But since it's from year 2000, one, it has luminova on the dial and the hands, so it glows in the dark. Two, it also has the so-called solid end links on the bracelet, right? You can kind of make sense of it here as well. That make it wear much more like a contemporary Rolex watch, heftier, sturdier. The bracelet presumably gains less stretch over time. And finally, aesthetically, everything seems to sit more flush, right, at the end here. Unlike, for example, I have an older Jubilee bracelet here, right, that has the hollow end links that you can bend even by squeezing them heavily in your hand, right, which I'm not going to do now, which are technically one of the shortcomings of the older bracelets, right? That unfortunately made them become looser and jigglier over time. I'm talking from an objective standpoint, right? Us vintage lovers come to love, in fact, a Rolex bracelet that's a little stretched out, that's a little jingly jangly Jubilee, as we like to say. I love it. I don't have a problem with it. But for someone who is looking for a modern feeling sports watch, in year 2000, you have something that has functional luminous material in luminova that glows, that will allow your dial, the index markers, and the hands to glow in the dark. And that your bracelet will have solid end links, so it will sit nicely and in a more substantial way on your wrist. You still will have the holes case, right? That's what allowed me to take out that bracelet so easily from my Datejust. You can just even use a toothpick to get into that hole and pop it out instantly and change into a leather strap, if you like, and if it fits the mood, into a NATO strap, if you want something sportier and much more casual, and if you're going to get into contact with water, for example, right, which isn't too kind on leather, suede, and other kinds of straps. All this being said, some people do prefer the no holes look. And, you know, if you have the right tools, the bracelets are not that much harder to remove in that case either. So it might be just an aesthetic choice at some point. I do prefer that holes case look. And I think the year 2000, right? I showed you another watch because my GMT-Master II is from year 1997, which means that it doesn't have a solid end link bracelet, which means it doesn't have luminova on the dial, unlike my Explorer 2. But these can be things you look for, right? If you find something from around year 2000, 2001, 2002, you can have something that resembles in its functional aspects a most modern Rolex watch, even as you have certain elements that place the watch into a zone where it has this authentic and vintage feeling, even if it's not properly considered vintage. M3 6-speed, Lord, I enjoy your content. You have helpful insights. Man, I enjoy your presence, and thank you so much for your kind words. What is the best bang per buck Rolex you can buy from the 80s and early 90s? Is it the GMT? I think it's still the Explorer 2. If you can find an Explorer 2 black dial from early 90s, that's just a great buy. It gives you the GMT function. You can tell time in 2 different time zones. Some people, in fact, don't want to deal with a rotating bezel and prefer that simpler all steel look. And the Explorer 2s with the black dial, I'm talking about reference 16570, are trending at a slightly lower rate than the ones with white dials, as the one I showed you, which are a little more expensive. So that's the dial. When did I pick up my GMT-Master II? It was in February. So year 2000, for me, that is the ultimate sweet spot if you're looking for a compromise between vintage and neo-vintage on one hand and modern and contemporary on the other. You have in year 2000, you can find a 16710 with the Hulse case, with Luminova on the dial and the hands, on the index marker and the hands, with this GMT-Master II functionality that can allow you to tell 3 different time zones by just one glance on the face of your watch. And you would have still a relatively modern movement in your watch. And Rolex has that advantage of having a very wide network of watchmenders. Of course, you can demean Rolex for being too common and too easily found and to be on everyone's wrist as a luxury sports watch. But that also means you have watchmenders, watchmakers anywhere in the world who are familiar with these movements and can service them if you need to. So, Joe, welcome back. Low-key collector. Yes, I do actually love the sunburst brushed bezel on the Explorer 2. It fades out in ways that might not be preferable to everyone, but I even love the way it ages and patinas. So I don't mind it at all. So Archive, I want to hear if you have any questions. But I love your statement. 90s are the best decade of all time. Mike Tyson, the Chicago Bulls, the 93 Explorer 2, and of course, me. Absolutely. It is a decade that has given us many, many gifts, including Archive of sorts. GB Vol says, I'm always needing to tell time in at a minimum 2 time zones. Yeah, that's why the GMT Master and Explorer 2 watches are just perfect. It's one of the most useful complications in watches, travel time or GMT Master function. It's great. Any other questions, Archive, and any other questions from the audience that relates to this particular question of getting a GMT Master II? What I will say again, I will just repeat myself to recap some of the things that I said earlier. You can read up on this as much as you want. I can film hours and hours of footage of me handling some of these watches and try to give you some pointers as to what to look for to get the best example possible and to avoid fakes and Franken watches that are put together from elements and parts from different decades, but nothing will quite substitute having the hands-on experience yourself. So you live in a metropolitan area, go to Rolex authorized dealers, cycle through the current models, contemporary models. Now, a lot of the biggest dealers have at least exhibition-only models where you can test them out and see how they feel, see how they look on your wrist and how they wear for you. Again, go to trusted secondary dealers and even jewelers in your area and look through their stock. If they're not letting you look at their watches and examine them with a loop, with a UV light, uh, possibly taking the bracelet out, checking serial numbers, checking the codes on the bracelet, on the end links, so on and so forth. If they don't let you do that, if they don't let you test out the functions of the watch on top of all that, you can't trust that kind of dealer. Just walk away. Again, you live in a world where these things are available and they're also very expensive. So they need to respect your rights as a customer to make the safest and best choice for yourself. Archive is giving me a compliment again. Just to direct you guys, if you're interested in boxing history at all, check out Archive of Sorts' channel. He's the kind of person and he's the kind of mind I aspire to be, I aspire to become in the horological world, in the Archiverse, in our little dark corner of the internet. Whatever Archive is for boxing history, I would like to become that for horological knowledge and history. Low-key collector, do you think 3186 moments are worth the premium? I think I will end up saying something very controversial here. So let me try to choose my words carefully. Loki is asking a very important question, right? This the 3186 movement, as opposed to the 3185 movement, was introduced roughly, I think, around year 2005. So you will have watches from 2005, 6, and 7 archive, where you have a newer movement. I think I can I really recall some of the differences offhand. I know it has more power reserve. I know it's supposed to be a more stable, more modern movement. It gets rid of the so-called wiggle problem with the GMT hand, if I'm not mistaken. Again, feel free to correct me. I'm really speaking off the dome here. So if I say anything wrong or off the mark, please jump in from the chat. Do I think it's worth the premium? People charge a lot more for a 16710 and 16570 from year 2005 and onwards because they have this newer movement. I think no. But then I have a number of watches that I cycle through. The power reserve is not make or break for me. The minimal difference they have there, I think it's about 8 hours. Yeah, I'm not really a modernist when it comes to watches, so I don't get really finicky about movements, about the accuracy in telling time. I do approach from the standpoint of my personal preferences. I do approach the aesthetics more. So if I'm moving into this neo vintage modern sweet spot, I pretty much agree with what M3 6-speed says, right? The sweet spot is the watches from year 2000 that have the solid end links on the bracelet, the Holz case, And they have the luminova on the index marker and the hands. So all sorts of functionality, modern functionality, and a kind of vintage feel combined and wrapped in one neat package. That's what I prefer. The newer movement, it's a better movement, 3186, that's introduced in 2005. So if you don't mind paying the premium and you want the more modern movement, why not? I don't think it's worth paying the premium. When did they turn all sapphire? As far as I know, so listen, they're always, as it is with Rolex, there are always exceptions. So as far as I know, there was a reference 16700, right, which was the last iteration of GMT Master, right? So the hour and GMT hands are still coupled. And that is a watch that you can look into, archive. It was produced from year 1988 to 1999. And it was a more affordable option. The thing that would make it attractive, and this is the opposite of 16760, which we call the Fat Lady, which had the newer GMT Master movement, and it's a little thicker than 16750 and 16710. This case is even thinner than all of these reference numbers we counted. So even though it loses out on the GMT Master II functionality, it has a thinner case using the Rolex caliber 3175. I want to say that this watch, until very late, had acrylic crystal, but I might be getting I might be losing my bearings here and getting confused a little bit. I know the sapphire crystals were introduced on precious metal Rolex watches much earlier, but 1984 is really the year where you see the deployment or employment of sapphire crystals more or less all across the line when it comes to steel sports Rolex models. Right. That's why M3 6 speeds point is absolutely relevant here, because we're talking about the day date, right? Gold subs from around the same era too have sapphire crystals. The luxury line had an earlier introduction, but 1984 seems to be the year where you start seeing sapphire crystals. I want to say almost across the board. I will look into that question and be more specific next time we talk about this subject. But yes, the so-called Fat Lady, which was the 1982-88, was the first time they introduced a sapphire crystal for a GMT Master. Right before that, it was all acrylic, plastic, plexiglass, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, all across the board for the sports line, I think 84 is a nice cutoff. You can use that as a general rule of thumb. Yeah. Again, GB Vool was calling me a Luddite. Exactly. I prefer the acrylic crystal, for example. I know sapphire is sturdier. It's harder to crack. But it's like a dust and fingerprint magnet. I hate having to clean it all the time during the day. You know, I have very grubby hands, so somehow I end up leaving a whole thumbprint on it, and then I have to polish it out. With acrylic, you don't have that, and any scratches that it gets during the day or over the days and weeks and years, just make it look sexier and more mysterious and a little foggy in the best way possible. It's just perfect. But yes, you're looking for functionality, right? You want to watch fitted with the sapphire crystal, and anything from that period onwards, 84 onwards, the Fat Lady 16760, the GMT Master II, uh, the newer model 16710, they will be perfect for you. Yes, the solid gold watches, the precious metal watches had the solid end link bracelets, and in general solid link bracelets much earlier as well. Um, so the luxury line always was a little different. Of course, the day dates had the no holes case quite early on too. Bright blue comment. What country am I in? I'm in the United States of America, downtown Los Angeles, California. Guys, we have a few more minutes here. I'm gonna post the link and see if anyone wants to come and have a chat. I welcome that very much. But otherwise, I'm gonna wrap this up right around the 60-minute mark. But before that, I'll say this again. My campaign towards monetization continues. So if you have enjoyed this content, if you learned something from it, please upvote, like, subscribe, and tell all your friends. And if you feel so inclined, my PayPal address is there, my Cash App is there, which is $LHVVV. And the email address that is connected to PayPal, Lord Hellespont the fifth at gmail.com, that's Lord Hellespont V at gmail.com, is also the best way to contact me. And I'm keeping my promise to produce custom videos for you at no cost whatsoever until the end of this month. I'll start charging for custom videos like this, for collection reviews, for any kind of advice you would like on an upcoming purchase. If you want me to look into a particular brand's history or investigate the heritage, the provenance, and the history of a specific model within their line, you can just send me the questions. You can send me your suggestions for topics until the end of the month, and I will line them up for consideration absolutely for free until the end of this month. After that, I'll start charging a nominal amount. I know my place. I'm not going to ask for much, but I just want to offer this opportunity. And of course, it helps me create content, and I will take the pleasure in helping you out with some of your questions. Someone said next to TPG's penthouse. It's quite close actually, but thankfully not too close for comfort. Mathis, Legend, Bright Blue Comet, thank you so much. Archive, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to answer your question and make this video. The original OC, thank you for your kind words. Low-key Collector, thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to my channel. Chunkster, yes, I mentioned it a few times before. I am in Southern California. I am, in fact, in downtown Los Angeles. Yeah, and if you're in Los Angeles and you want to meet up and size me up or something, that's always welcome too. Feel free to drop me a line in the email. Joking aside, I'm always happy to talk with other watch nerds. So, I'm sure we can organize some sort of meetup. There are a lot of people from Southern California in the watch community, um, and you know maybe we'll go through some of the secondary market dealers here whom we can actually trust, and check out a few watches, and increase our experience and knowledge in the process, even if we are not necessarily looking for purchasing anything in particular or anything specifically. Bright Blue Comet says, I moved to New York from West Hollywood 2 years ago, and I moved from New York to Los Angeles now more than 5 years ago. But I want to move back to East Coast. Anyway, guys, I'm going to post the link one more time. But this is good for me as well, because I need to have a few hours to both rest and freshen up a little, and read up and prepare the show for the Archie Luxury live stream, which I will be moderating, which I will be leading in less than 3 hours now. So I would love to see you there in less than 3 hours, 3 p.m. my time, 6 p.m. On the eastern seaboard, as they say. And until then, please like, subscribe, and tell all your friends about my channel. If you would like to send your questions and video requests, please email me at lordhellespont5@gmail.com. That's lordhellespont@gmail.com. And if you would like to contribute to your liking and according to your availability, or ability rather, please feel free to send me a PayPal donation at the same email address, or Cash App me at $LHVVV. And with that, I will sign out. Cheers. Thank you so much for helping me out here and on Archie's stream. Thank you so much for supporting this channel in any way you can. I know it will take time, but we will get to 1,000 subscribers, and we will have a huge party. I promise you. Thank you so much. I'll see you in 2 hours and 45 minutes.